This is a lesson on subtracting integers. So let's take a look at the first problem here. Here we are going to subtract -3 from 6. So to figure out how to subtract integers, I drew some number lines for these different problems. And so when we are starting on a number line, we look at the first number. And so the first number here is 6, positive 6. So this is where we start. So start on the number line at positive 6. So we go over to positive 6, way over here, and put a dot right there. Now, what we have to remember when we are taking away this symbol right here, this minus sign, subtraction, think of it as take away. So what we are going to end up doing is we're going to take away whatever type of number they have. Now remember that these are the negative numbers on this side. These are the positives on this side. So when we are taking away negatives, we're taking away these negatives. So it's kind of the opposite of a negative is what this really means. So if I take away negatives, I'm going away from the negative direction. So take away negatives means go away. Away from the negatives, in this case, -3. Go away from -3. So we're going away from those negatives in this direction. So we end up going 1, 2, 3 spaces in the positive direction. We end up at 9. And so the answer is 9. So a way we can end up doing this is something we call add the opposite. So add the opposite. So let's talk about what that means. First of all, what is an opposite? Well, an opposite is the sign that's opposite. For instance, if I'm talking about 9, the opposite of 9 is way over here at -9. So if I'm at 6, and I'm taking away negatives, take away -3, that's the same thing as saying the adding +3. So notice that we added +3 on this one because we were going away from the negatives. We're going away from -3. So minus negative is the same as add the opposite. Change subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. And so our answer here is 9. Let's take a look at the next one. And you always start at this first number here. So this is our starting point. So we start at -4 on the number line. We're starting there. And here we are taking away positives. Well, if we're taking away positives, this means we're go away from positives, positive 6. So we're going away from the positives. These are positive. This is the positive direction is out in this direction here. The negative direction is off in this direction. So we are going away. That's what this minus sign means. Go away from the positive 6. Go away. So that means we're going in this direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's our answer, -10. So let's take a look at this add the opposite again. So if I write it down, -4, take away +6. So if I wanted to add the opposite, I would change subtraction to addition, but notice that I added negatives. That's what I was doing here. I was going in the negative direction, 6 spaces, because I was going away from +6. I was taking away 6. If I take away +6, it means I'm going in the negative direction. I'm adding the opposite. Change subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. And when I have the same sign and I'm adding, well, I actually do add, and I end up with -10, the same answer I got when I use the number line. Here's another problem to try similar to that. Here we are again, starting at the first number. We start here, and we're going over to -7. And again, this minus sign means that we're taking away. We're going away from -3. We take away -3. That's what it means. And so if we're taking away negatives, this is the negative direction, this way. Well, I'm taking away this negative direction. That means I'm actually heading in the positive direction, which is this way. So If I'm taking away negatives, that means I want to go in the positive direction. 1, 2, 3. And that's where I end up, -4. So let's see how it works with this rule here of add the opposite. So remember, all we're doing is we're changing subtraction to addition and taking the opposite of this number. And so we're at -7, take away -3. So if we use that rule of add the opposite, we change subtraction to addition, and we do the opposite of -3, which is +3. And so if I have opposite signs, the rule for addition is I actually subtract those numbers, and I end up at -4. That's the answer I get when I add the opposite, the same answer I got when I use the number line. So let's take a look at another set of directions you see. It says follow the rule to complete each table. So the rule is subtract -5. Subtract -5. So we're not subtracting +5, we're taking away negatives. So what is this? I could rewrite as take away -5. Subtract -5. Well, subtracting negatives is the same thing as going away. So really, I'm going to take away negatives. I'm actually going to remove negatives, take away -5. Or you can think of it as another way to say take away, remove -5. If I'm removing negatives, that means I go in the positive direction. That means I need to go toward the positive direction. That's the way I want to go. So what's another way to write this take away negatives? Well, take away -5 is the same thing as adding +5. So really all I have to do is add 5. So here's my input. My rule is to add 5 or subtract negatives. So I'm going to take away -5. I'm taking away -5. I'm going to take away -5 from all these numbers here. Take away -5. But again, my rule, as I said over here, when I take away negatives, that's the same thing as adding positives. Adding positives, adding positives, adding positives. So really, I have to add 5 to the input number. Well, add 5 to 11, I end up at 16. Add 5 to -8. Well, here they're opposite signs. So if you picture this on a number line, you're at -8. Okay, that's where we're starting. I'm adding 5. I'm going in the positive direction. So this is adding 5 spaces. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't make it all the way to 0, so I end up at, this is -7, -6, -5, -4, -3. So if you notice, you subtract the two numbers when they're opposite in sign like this. More negatives than positives, that's why it's a negative. These are opposites. When we have opposites, we actually subtract those numbers. So there we end up with 0. So if you start at -5, here's -5 right here, and count the spaces. You have -4, -3, -2, -1, 0. 0. See, I'm adding 5, and if I add 5 to -5, you always end up at 0. So those are opposites. 7 plus 5. Well, 17 plus 5. Well, we just have to add those two numbers, and we end up at 22. Let's take a look at the last one here. Last one says the temperature was 14 degrees. This is the starting point. That's where we begin. But it was 14 degrees below 0. So what kind of number do you represent 14 degrees below 0 with? Well, 0 is right here. Below 0, what are these types of numbers below 0? Those are negative numbers. So that means that we're dealing with negative numbers, -14. So that's where I start, -14 in the evening, and it dropped. What does that mean? It dropped 6 degrees. That means take away 6 degrees. Okay, and by noon the next day, the temperature was another 3 degrees colder. So that means I need to take 3 more away. And then it had been during the night. What was the temperature at noon? Well, I need to take away these numbers from -14. So when I'm taking away 6, this is I'm taking away positive 6. So let's go ahead and start with just these two numbers right here. So I'm at negative 14, and I'm taking away 6. So let's go ahead and think of it this way. You're at negative 14. It's way over here on the number line. But we are taking away positives. So that means we are adding negatives. So really, it's getting colder. It's not getting warmer. It's getting colder. So now it's negative 20 degrees when I combine those two. I add them together. Now I need to take another 3 away. Well, if I take 3 away from this, that means it's getting colder again. I need to add more negatives. And so when I add those negatives, I end up with negative 23 degrees. And so there it is, negative 23 degrees Fahrenheit. The answer is C. So that's some rules on subtracting integers. Remembering add the opposite is a good way to change it to an addition problem. And remembering the rule with addition, if they're the same sign you add, like we did here, or over here, if they're opposite signs like they are here, we ended up subtracting those numbers. Good luck on tonight's homework.